Now, considering all of the success of this past session, we should not be where we are today. A special session was entirely avoidable. There was plenty of time for the House and Senate to forge compromises to avoid the time and the taxpayer expense of a special session. Because of their inability or refusal to pass a simple law that would prevent the medical profession from shutting down, I am announcing a special session to complete that unfinished business. But if I'm going to ask taxpayers to foot the bill for a special session, I intend to make it count. The special session will begin on July 18th, 2017. The first order of business will be sunset legislation that failed to pass during the regular session. This is necessary legislation to keep state agencies like the Texas Medical Board functioning and operating. Without this legislation, Texas would be unable to license new doctors or to regulate the practice of medicine. Unfortunately, it was used as political fodder during the regular session rather than the must-pass legislation that it is. To ensure its passage, the sunset bills will be the only legislation on the special session until they pass out of the Senate in full. The Lieutenant Governor has assured me what he has stated publicly. He can pass sunset legislation out of the Senate in no more than 2 or 3 days. After the sunset legislation passes out of the Senate, the following 19 items will be added immediately to the special session for the House and Senate to vote on. Nothing is more important than our children, their future, and our future is shaped by the quality of their education. My job as governor is to ensure that we attract and we retain the best and brightest educators. Too many of our great teachers are underpaid. Too many potential teachers work elsewhere because teacher pay is too low. Texas must do better. We must do better to attract and retain quality teachers in our classrooms. I want that process to begin now, during this special session. I want legislation on my desk that increases teacher pay by $1,000. To achieve that, Texas doesn't need to spend more. We just need to spend smarter. The pay increases can easily be achieved by passing laws that reprioritize how schools spend money, and we can do that without taxpayers spending a penny more. Now, to ensure that our public schools attract and retain the very best, I also want legislation that gives administrators greater flexibility in their hiring and retention practices. Principals and administrators should have the tools to retain and to reward the very best teachers and to replace those who are ineffective. Now, one way to improve teacher pay for the long term is to overhaul our outdated school finance system. We spend too much money on bureaucracy and overhead and too little money where it's needed in the classroom. To kickstart school finance reform, I want legislation creating a Texas Commission on School Finance Reform like Senate Bill 2144 by Senator Larry Taylor. The commission will work throughout the interim on solutions to our failed Robin Hood program, and it will craft serious reforms for our broken school finance system. While we are working to improve education, we should also provide better opportunities for students with special needs. I've talked with countless parents who shed tears of joy when talking about the potential for them to be able to choose the school that is best for their child's needs. Those parents, they need our help. Their children deserve it. During the regular session, Representative Simmons authored a bill that would have addressed this issue, but that bill never made it to the House floor. I want to give this bill another shot. So I am adding school choice for special needs children to the call for this special session. Now, one reason why our school finance system must be revised is to rein in skyrocketing property taxes. Texans need property tax reform right now. I'm calling on the legislature to pass SB 2 with the rate rollback provision, or pass a better law that will reform the spiraling property taxes in Texas. If we are going to come together and work this summer at taxpayers' expense, then let us work on relieving Texas homeowners from out-of-control property taxes. For my next special session item, I'll offer a proposal that I raised last session. It's a proposal that is both good governance, and it might just solve our property tax problem. To rein in the growth of both state and local government spending, I'm calling on the legislature to pass either a law or to amend our Constitution to provide that neither state spending nor local spending can exceed the growth in population and inflation. Limiting the growth of both state and local spending to population and inflation will contain government spending while also retaining flexibility for our faster-growing communities. It should put a lid on government's ability to raise taxes, including those pesky property taxes. While we're on the topic of reining in local governments, I'm calling for legislation that reduces, restricts, and prohibits local regulations. Some local governments, like the City of Austin, are doing everything they can to overregulate. In the process, they are stifling our economy, interfering with job creation, and undermining private property rights. To end this regulatory overreach, I want legislation that does three things. One, prevents cities from micromanaging what property owners do with trees on their private land. Two, prevents local governments from changing the rules midway through a construction project. And three, speeds up permitting requirements so that city bureaucrats can't drag out projects and drive up the cost of doing business. Government's role is to empower and to create greater opportunity for both businesses and citizens to be able to prosper. These three proposals will help local governments achieve that goal. Cities are also abusing their authority when it comes to their annexation practices. Senator Campbell offered a very thoughtful proposal to limit annexation by cities. As she points out, forced annexation is a form of taxation without representation. Today, I'm bringing that bill back to life, and I am adding it to this special session. I want to reform and to restrict the municipal annexation process in Texas. Cities that annex property without the vote of those affected is piracy by government. It must end. Now, during the regular session, the legislature passed a law that prohibits Texans from texting while driving. I signed it into law today to ensure Texas is doing all it can to prevent accidents caused by texting while driving. But I was not satisfied with the law as it was written. My office worked with the legislators to try to amend this law even more than the way it was eventually passed. We tried to preempt all local ordinances that regulate mobile devices and vehicles, but the amendment did not fully achieve my goal. So, now that Texas does have a statewide ban on texting and driving, I am calling for legislation that fully preempts cities and counties from any regulation of mobile devices in vehicles. We don't need a patchwork quilt of regulations that dictate driving practices in Texas. Another way to avoid a patchwork quilt of conflicting local regulations is for Texas to establish a single statewide rule protecting the privacy of women and children. House Bill 2899 by Representative Ron Simmons would achieve that. It preempts local regulations that conflict with state standards. It also upholds federal standards that prohibit discrimination. At a minimum, we need a law that protects the privacy of our children in our public schools. The next item that I'm adding to the special session is a law that prohibits using taxpayer dollars to collect union dues. I spoke about Senator Huffman's proposal during my State of the State address. Senate Bill 13 was voted out of the Senate, but never made it to the House floor. With the extra time that we have together this summer, I want legislation to redouble its efforts and get a bill to my desk that prohibits both state and local governments from deducting union dues from public employees' paychecks. We must also use this opportunity to do more to protect our unborn children. I applaud the legislature for passing landmark pro-life legislation during the regular session. But there's more we can do, more we must do. During my State of the State address, I called for a law to prohibit local governments from funding abortion providers with taxpayer dollars. That legislation never passed the House, and it never received a hearing in the Texas Senate. I am adding to this special session legislation that will prohibit state and local governments from providing taxpayer funds to abortion providers. I'm also adding other pro-life initiatives that did not make it to my desk during the regular session. This includes Senator Larry Taylor's pro-life insurance reform. It also includes legislation by Representative Capriglione, including the Hughes Amendment, to strengthen reporting requirements when health complications result from abortions. It also includes legislation by Representative Greg Bonin to strengthen patient protections related to do not resuscitate orders. The next item for the special session is legislation to crack down on mail ballot fraud. As Attorney General, I prosecuted countless cases of mail ballot fraud, and yet problems still persist today, and reform is critically needed. The election fraud under investigation in Dallas is just the latest example. Dallas County District Attorney Faith Johnson is investigating mail ballot vote fraud with about 700 mail-in ballots that are in question. A West Dallas senior citizen said this: somebody that would be defrauding senior citizens like that really needs to be locked up. I agree. I want legislation that toughens penalties on mail ballot vote fraud and makes it harder for that crime to be committed in Texas. Another very important bill that failed to cross the finish line during the regular session was legislation by Senator Kolkhorst that would have extended the Maternal Mortality Task Force. The task force investigates and studies pregnancy-related deaths in Texas. Armed with the information and insight provided by the task force, our healthcare system can target better treatments for diseases such as diabetes, high blood pressure, and postpartum depression. It can help us to address the leading causes of pregnancy-related deaths. To protect women in Texas, I'm calling on the legislature to complete their work and to pass legislation to address the maternal mortality rate in Texas. To recap, the special session will begin on July 18th, 2017. The day that sunset legislation passes out of the Senate, all of these other items will be added to the special session. Legislators have 6 weeks to prepare for the special session, and then another 30 days to pass these proposals. If they fail, it's not for lack of time. It would be because of a lack of will. I expect legislators to return with a calm demeanor and with a firm commitment to make Texas even better.